Good morning, everyone. Fox News alert: the coronavirus now killing at least 170 people in China, where the number of cases there is increasing dramatically, forcing more airlines now to cancel flights to mainland China, as the World Health Organization is now considering declaring the virus a global health emergency. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra Smith.
And I'm Ed Henry. China seeing now more than 1,000 new cases every single day, nearly 8,000 cases worldwide. 5 of them.
At this stage, this is still obviously a very active outbreak, and information is being updated and changing by the hour. The challenge is great, but the response has been massive, and the Chinese government deserve huge credit for that response and for the transparency in which they have dealt with this. The whole world needs to be on alert now. The whole world needs to take action and be ready for any cases that come, either from the original epicenter or from other epicenters.
We've got Fox team coverage for you this morning. Benjamin Hall live in London with the latest on the international developments. But we begin with Jonathan Seri in Atlanta with more on how the U.S. is responding to all of it. Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning to you, Sandra. This virus is being watched at the highest levels in Washington. The Trump administration announcing the creation of a presidential coronavirus task force. It is being led by Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar and is tasked with leading the U.S. government's response to the coronavirus outbreak. With 99% of cases still concentrated in China, public health officials
there could be many more exportations into other countries. And then once the patients are in the other countries, the disease could spread to local people. And then, of course, you would have outbreaks of an infectious disease that requires a lot of hospitalizations and will cause some deaths around the world.
A team from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention continues to monitor 195 U.S. citizens who arrived aboard a charter flight from Wuhan, China. So far, none of the passengers has shown signs of coronavirus infection. However, officials say all of the passengers are voluntarily remaining in housing at March Air Reserve Base in California to reduce the risk of infection. Now, the symptoms of coronavirus are similar to those of flu, which is common in every U.S. state this time of year. How do you tell the difference? Well, clinicians need to ask their patients about their travel history, and if symptomatic patients say that they were in China in recent weeks, then additional testing may be necessary. Sandra?
All of that very important information this morning. Jonathan Seri, thank you.
Meanwhile, in China, the fight is on to contain the spread of coronavirus. Benjamin Hall is live in London now on the global response. Benjamin?
Good morning, Ed. And yes, we have seen a dramatic increase day in, day out over the last few days inside China. About 1,000 new cases every day that we are seeing. And it has led President Xi Jinping to describe this as a devil virus. And he's vowed to try and eliminate it as soon as possible. Much of China is itself now in lockdown, with many places looking like ghost towns. Around 60 million Chinese are now under some kind of lockdown, and travel has been severely restricted in the country. Although questions have been raised about transparency there, the Chinese, for example, refused U.S. assistance a number of times. The World Health Organization has praised China's handling of the outbreak. But the virus is now affecting China's economy as well, with supply chains being severely disrupted. Chinese markets are down around 3.5%. Hong Kong markets are down around 5%. Now companies like Google, IKEA, Starbucks and Tesla have closed their shops there or stopped operations. Americans, the risk is considered very low at this point. 99% of cases are in China, and HHS and CDC, that's the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Center for Disease Control, saying that they recognized this back in December. They have contingency plans in place, and they're working hard to contain it and prevent it coming further to the U.S. Ed?
Benjamin Hall, thank you. Much more on this coming up. He just mentioned, in fact, HHS with the head of the White House's coronavirus task force. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar is going to be our guest, 9:30 a.m. Eastern. We'll get a lot more detail on.
I want Hunter Biden. I want Joe Biden. If we get anybody we want, we will be here for a very long time.
If you have the unmitigated temerity to want witnesses in a trial, we will make you pay for it. That's their argument. How dare the House assume there will be witnesses in a trial?
One thing that seems to be sure in Washington is that what goes around comes around. It'll get worse and worse, and there'll be more and more, and every president will be impeached.
Both sides on the impeachment trial taking questions from senators yesterday as President Trump weighs in on some newly resurfaced videos throwing the credibility of both John Bolton and Adam Schiff into question. In an interview last August, Bolton makes no claim of a quid pro quo when speaking about President Trump's July phone call with the Ukrainian president.
The president called to congratulate President Zelensky on his election and then on his success in the parliamentary election. They were very warm and cordial calls because the success of Ukraine, maintaining its freedom, its system of representative government, a free market economy free of corruption, and dealing with the problems of the Donbass and the Crimea are high priorities here, obviously, but high priorities for the United States as well.
Joining us now is Senator David Perdue. Senator, good morning, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, Sandra.
So how did the resurfacing of that video change things?
It really doesn't, and neither did it last weekend when it came up to start with. Look, Sandra, this is a flawed process. The articles that were sent to us from the House are nothing more than poison or fruit from a poison tree. The process in the House was illegitimate. It's inappropriate. They denied due process. And frankly, right now, the Democrats have come over to the Senate. They've harassed us, calling us co-conspirators in a cover-up. They call the defense team liars. And what they want us to do now is what they should have done during their investigation. They should have called these witnesses and back when they had the responsibility.
But Senator, looking back, heading into this process, I did see that you were open to witnesses if there was the need to hear from additional witnesses. So what have you seen play out in that impeachment trial that has led you to believe that no witnesses are needed?
Well, let's clarify that. What I said was any witnesses that are already in the record, there's 17 witnesses that the House called, they haven't even requested any of those witnesses. And so my view is if we wanted to clarify something from an existing witness, that's fine. There's no they've already done depositions and so forth. What I'm saying is we can't go outside the scope of what we've been given. Our charge in the Senate is to rule on the articles that have been brought to us. These two articles, as we've heard over and over this week after 8 scintillating days here, is that the articles are not impeachable. And more than that, the House managers have not proven their case.
So when it comes to the votes that are needed to block calling additional witnesses in this trial, do you believe that Republicans have that?
Well, I'm optimistic. I mean, it's the right thing to do. It's a bad precedent because what happens if we fall into that Pandora's box? Sandra, we could set a precedent for future impeachments where impeachments are initiated in the House with very little investigation. They're sent over to the Senate in a rush form, just like they have been here. And then we're required, under this president, to call witnesses and so forth. There's a reason the founders didn't want that. They wanted the investigation to be done in the House because they could do it in committee without shutting the House down. In the Senate, under an impeachment process, as you can see from the last 8 days, we can't do anything else. It totally shuts the Senate down, and that's what this is about. Chuck Schumer wants to shut the Senate down because this is about the Senate majority and getting the White House in 2020.
We are going to hear from Chuck Schumer in a couple hours from now. He's going to be holding a press conference, so we will see what he's saying this morning. Meanwhile, it wasn't just that John Bolton video. It was also an Adam Schiff video, who is lead impeachment manager now. It's a video from May 2005, and after it resurfaced, the president is now claiming game over. Let's listen to that together.
Particularly given the history where we've had the politicization of intelligence over WMD, why we would pick someone who the very same issue has been raised repeatedly, and that is John Bolton's politicization of the intelligence he got on Cuba and on other issues. Why we would want someone with that lack of credibility, I can't understand.
So then it was a lack of credibility, and now he is declaring him not only a believable and important, but an extremely relevant witness in this trial.
Senator, that's just the latest example of the total hypocrisy we hear from the House. We have an overwhelming case, and yet now we need more witnesses because we can't prove our case. I mean, the hypocrisy from the Democratic man. By the way, they're the Democratic managers. Let's be very clear. This is not a House manager situation. This is not a bipartisan effort coming out of the House, which the founders warned us about. Alexander Hamilton talked about it repeatedly. This needs to be an extreme case. It needs to be bipartisan, and the House has just not done it.
Well, your colleague, Senator Van Hollen, Chris Van Hollen, he believes that it is impossible not to summon John Bolton to testify in this trial. And he put this tweet out. I'll get your reaction, Senator. On Friday, I plan to offer a motion that will require Chief Justice John Roberts to, 1, subpoena witnesses and documents if he determines that they are relevant, 2, rule on any claims of executive privilege in order to expedite the trial. To that you say what?
Well, the judge is not going to do that. But more importantly, it's another attempt to prevaricate and to throw confusion into the process. This is very simple. They have brought over 2 very serious accusations, which, by the way, neither rise to the level of impeachment. And even with that, they didn't prove the case. And therefore, our job now is to adjudicate that. We don't need any more information to make a ruling on the 2 articles of impeachment that have been brought to us, period.
Senator Barrasso says, I'm ready to vote on final judgment. Do you believe Republicans are planning to move directly to vote on these 2 articles of impeachment as soon as tomorrow, Senator? Final thoughts?
Well, I sure hope so. We're working hard to make it that way. Look, this is shutting the Senate down. We've heard all the evidence now. It's become very repetitive, as you could see last night. It's time to move to a vote on acquittal as soon as possible.
Senator David Perdue of Georgia, appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We are going to have a lot more on the impeachment trial coming up as it resumes this afternoon. White House Press Secretary Hogan Gidley is our headliner. He'll be joining us next hour. And later on, we will have brand new reaction from both sides. As I mentioned, Republican Senator Rick Scott, Democratic Senator Bob Casey will be joining us later in the program. Press conferences will be happening from both sides. So stay with us. A lot of breaking news, a lot of live events.
Think back to Tuesday night when the word leaked that McConnell had that meeting with the Republican senators. He said, I don't have the votes to block witnesses. It now appears that was designed as a leak, a strategy, put pressure on folks. Now you got Cory Gardner, Pat Toomey, they were on the fence. They're now saying we don't want witnesses. The momentum is now on McConnell's side. We'll see.
We'll see.
Firefighters, meanwhile, pulling families to safety. A 25-story high-rise goes up in flames. As we learn about a critical safety system the building simply did not have.
Also, authorities unveiling what they believe to be the longest drug tunnel under the border between Mexico and the U.S. Wait until you hear just how big that is.
And counting down to Monday's Iowa caucuses, why the Biden campaign is reportedly reaching out to his rivals. Maybe a little help from his friends.
All eyes are on Iowa right now, and we have such great people representing Iowa and the Iowa voters. Like, I'm just really proud of us all right now. It's an exciting time here in our state.
Well, it is the final run-up to the Iowa caucuses Monday. Some candidates are spending some big money. Tom Steyer and Bernie Sanders hitting 7 figures in ad spending, and Elizabeth Warren is just shy of $1 million ad buy. Let's bring in Dan Henninger, deputy editor for the Wall Street Journal editorial page, joining us now. Dan, good morning to you.
Be with you, Sandra.
First up, what do we need to know this close to the Iowa caucuses? What's happening?
Well, what we need to know is what is in the head of those Iowa caucus goers. And one of the wonderful things about elections and caucuses is that you are unable to know what people are thinking unless they tell you. And that is, again, one of the interesting things about the caucuses. It's not like just going into a voting booth and walking out and saying who you voted for. These people debate among themselves, do some horse trading, and we get kind of a sense as we get closer who could be emerging as the front runner.
And who is spending some big money? Bernie Sanders, Tom Steyer. What are we seeing on that front?
Well, we're seeing Bernie Sanders and Tom Steyer spending a lot of money on television advertising, as is Mike Bloomberg. I mean, I like Mike Bloomberg because we are going to find out how far you can get by spending money on TV. And I think it matters a lot. You put your face in front of people. You become aware to voters, caucus goers. And as we know in the Iowa caucus, if you do not get 15%, then you have to start doing deals with some of the front runners like Bernie or Joe Biden and move your candidate over to support them.
That's the political headline this morning. Biden rivals privately pitching caucus night deals. Here it is. Biden's campaign has approached at least 2 rival primary campaigns seeking to broker agreements ahead of the Feb 3 caucuses. So what's happening there?
Yeah, well, sure. Again, it's whether they get to 15%, you're in the game or you're out of the game. And I think the one thing to keep in mind in this Iowa caucus is you've got all these candidates, you've got people talking about different Andrew Yang, Pete Buttigieg. The one thing that Democrats want to do is beat Donald J. Trump. And the big thing in their mind is which of these 7 or 8 candidates are going to be able to do that. Is it Joe Biden, who seems like the safe choice, or is it Bernie Sanders, who has this mystical support? And people always say he can beat Donald Trump, he can stand up to him. I think it's possible that Amy Klobuchar could do much better in Iowa than people think. Just because.
Meanwhile, your piece, Wall Street Journal, a communist coronavirus. China's political system is eventually going to damage the world by accident or by intent. What did you write in your piece, Dan?
Well, I wrote in my piece that one of the things that we're seeing here is this is a communist country. Communist China has been communist since 1949. Say anything until I heard from central authorities. And I'm arguing here with calling it a communist coronavirus, saying that this is the sort of inefficiencies that a communist regime produces, and that this is also the communist regime which is suppressing Hong Kong, pushing out into the South China Sea. We worry about the Huawei 5G technology. And the world cannot hide from the things that China is doing. And they present a danger either accidentally through something like the coronavirus or by intent through their military operations.
Fascinating piece in the Wall Street Journal this morning. 1,000 Americans living in the epicenter of that virus, Wuhan, China. So they've got more than 200 out. Yesterday we saw that plane land. We'll see if any more are able to get home in the coming days. Dan Henninger, thank you.
Great to Sandra.
All right, Ed.
All right, thanks, Sandra. Connecticut police searching the home of Fotis Dulos one day after he tried to commit suicide. An update on his condition and the murder case against him. Plus, Kobe Bryant's grieving widow speaking out for the very first time after that tragic loss of her husband and daughter.
Dulos killed his estranged wife, Jennifer Dulos, inside her garage last May and was caught on surveillance cameras throwing out bags of evidence, including bloody clothes, cleaning supplies, and zip ties. From Greece is in the States and should be at the hospital by now. Ed.
All right, Laura, thank you very much.
Thanks.
The president appointing a task force to lead the U.S. response to the deadly coronavirus outbreak as more countries report cases of it. Our next guest leading that task force, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar. He will be.
This Fox News alert, the number of confirmed cases of coronavirus now reaching nearly 8,000 worldwide. President Trump appointing a coronavirus task force to help lead the U.S. response to this outbreak. You see some photos from the meetings last night. The president meeting with his team, and Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar is the man who heads that group. He is our guest this morning. Mr. Secretary, thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you, Ed. Thank you.
It's good to have you. A growing number of experts, as you know, around the world are saying the World Health Organization should step in here and declare this a world health emergency. Do you agree?
So they are actually meeting as we speak to determine what
the president on. What is the president being told? And maybe more importantly, what is he saying behind closed doors about the threat to Americans? What is being done to protect Americans?
So the nice thing is what he's being briefed on is exactly what I'm telling you and the American people. We're being completely transparent about our actions here.
Yours, Brian.
While this is a potentially serious public health threat, it does not at this time pose a risk to the American public. We have to be balanced in our approach. We will take all public health measures necessary to protect the American public. So we brief the president, as we do ourselves, on the current epidemiological information on the spread of the virus, the steps happening internationally, and our preventive preparedness steps that we're taking here in the United States.
You seem very confident that we're getting a handle on this. That's good news. The New York Times, though, has an editorial this morning that you probably saw saying there are a lot of experts around the world who do not yet know how contagious this is, how deadly this new virus is. They say there are experts in just about every global industry that are now fretting over supply chains, economic impacts. And the headline is the world ready for the coronavirus? How do you answer that question?
So, Ed, we've actually been very transparent about what we do not know yet about about this virus, which is we don't know full information about its contagiousness, about its severity profile, which is why I'm delighted.
Claims, at least, and I want to separate fact from fiction, that the Trump administration has eliminated the Office of Pandemic Response that was created in 2014 over the Ebola epidemic, and that you've drastically scaled back the CDC's overseas outbreak prevention efforts, the Times claiming that this may hamper the U.S. response. What do you say?
It's just pathological that they have to attack the president even when he's showing this type of determined leadership to protect the American public. Last year, actually, if they would read their own paper, they would see that we changed our biohazard preparedness and response doctrine to actually have me as Secretary of Health and Human Services lead those efforts, and that's why this task force has me leading that, coordinating the all-of-government approach for any type of biohazard. And with regard to the CDC, we have a huge global health security agenda, and what we've actually done is focus our efforts in the highest risk areas, including China.
Okay, and just to button up another thing about the World Health Organization where I started, as you noted, they're meeting now. We should get word shortly on whether they're going to say this is specifically a public health emergency. I know you said, well, that doesn't really impact what the U.S. is doing, but just to be clear, a declaration like that would lead to a boost in public health measures, more funding and resources to help prevent it from spreading much wider. Would that be important to the U.S. efforts if, in fact, the World Health Organization makes that designation?
Again, it really doesn't change our efforts at all. It's a declaration just of status. It's very important in these situations. One of the most important things we can do is ensure the public, and in particular our healthcare providers, are knowledgeable. Because what do we do with an infectious disease outbreak? It's blocking and tackling against the disease. It's identifying people who may have symptoms, isolating them, diagnosing them, treating them, and then tracing the people, the contacts that they have been in touch with, and perhaps even the contacts of those contacts, and taking appropriate steps.
Last question.
Any type of public education is what's important.
Pardon me. Last question then. We had this plane arriving yesterday, mostly U.S. diplomats and other Americans who were on the ground in Wuhan. They're now in America. They're being checked out. Obviously, it seems like all of the important measures are being taken, but there's a lot of stories out there about hundreds of Americans who are still around Wuhan, others obviously around China. Talk more broadly about what you and the President and others are doing to make sure that Americans, not just here at home, but around the world, are safe.
Absolutely. So we've got some additional American citizens who are in that Hubei province of China. That's the epicenter of this outbreak. And we're going to be working with the State Department to ensure that if they want to, they can come home. But we'll take all steps necessary to protect the public health in connection with any type of transportation like that, as we did with the flight of the over 200 American diplomats, family members, and American citizens who came back yesterday. We want them to receive a warm welcome. We're going to treat them well, but we're going to take all appropriate public health measures to protect the American public.
All right. Secretary Alex Azar has a big job right now leading the President's efforts, this task force, to stay on top of this public health emergency. Mr. Secretary, appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Ed.
Kobe Bryant's widow, Vanessa, making her first public statement after the deaths of her husband and their 13-year-old daughter, Gianna, last weekend. In part, her Instagram post reads this: "There aren't enough words to describe our pain right now. I take comfort in knowing that Kobe and Gigi both knew that they were so deeply loved." Jeff Paul is live from Los Angeles with more on that. Jeff?
Yeah, Sandra, Vanessa Bryant not only thanking the millions of people who've shown their support, but she is now pledging to help the other victims' families, setting up a fund to support them through the Mamba Sports Foundation. She goes on to write, "I'm not sure what our lives hold beyond today, and it's impossible to imagine life without them. But we wake up each day trying to..." Coach Frank Vogel says the team is still very much grieving.
It's been very emotional, and something that brings us together. I'm around, the people that were closest to Kobe, throughout his time here. And
investigators say their causes of death were blunt trauma. Sandra?
Jeff Paul in Los Angeles. Jeff, thank you.
All right. Meanwhile, 2020 hopeful Elizabeth Warren trying to raise the stakes on election disinformation. What Senator Warren is proposing and why critics say her efforts might be a little bit ironic. The A-team weighing in.
I'm looking forward to that. Plus, President Trump's attorney arguing his push to investigate the Bidens is not impeachable. We're going to hear from a former Justice Department prosecutor on that next.
It cannot be a corrupt motive if you have a mixed motive that partially involves the national interest, partially involves electoral, and does not involve personal pecuniary interests. Every public official that I know believes that his election is in the public interest. And if a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, That cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment.
All right, well, that was President Trump's attorney, Alan Dershowitz, yesterday arguing quid pro quos to win elections are not impeachable, even if the president stood to benefit on the political front. Jim Trusty is a former Justice Department's prosecutor and joins us now. Jim, good morning to you.
Hey, Sandra.
So is that type of quid pro quo impeachable or not?
Well, we're going to find out if it's removable. But look, I think it's a very nuanced argument. It's a very good argument, and it really goes to the point that mixed motivation shouldn't be criminalized. If you've got a situation where an executive is doing what's right for the country, but also knows they stand to benefit by something, working out politically, that shouldn't be the stuff of criminal intent or of impeachment. So I think it's a pretty persuasive argument, actually, very nuanced one, and one the Wall Street Journal was kind of picking up on in an editorial before that.
We're reminded of that. Meanwhile, I want to ask you about this Justice Roberts blocking Senator Rand Paul's attempt to out the whistleblower, name the whistleblower in his questioning, and we are learning that he may try to force the issue, the senator may try to force the issue in questioning this afternoon. So what did you make of that, and was that the right role of the justice to step in?
Well, whether it's right or not, it's a huge issue. It's really fascinating on a number of fronts. I mean, the whistleblower, first of all, is not really a whistleblower. This is somebody that wrote a term paper with annotations to media who had an obvious argument to make more than just reporting a crime taking place around him. So the identity of that whistleblower would be interesting to the president's team just to see how strong the bias was. And then the secondary part, whether or not that person was having some sort of contact with Adam Schiff or his staffers, which Schiff has tried to dig in on and say never happened. So obviously if that happened, that's explosive. But to me, the procedural kind of interesting thing is if it's true that Roberts is weighing in, he's becoming more like a traditional trial judge than a ceremonial judge, which is really what the Constitution seems to call for. And that could bode very poorly for the Republicans if he's going to start excluding potential testimony, like, say, a Hunter Biden or a whistleblower because they're legally irrelevant. So a lot to see when it comes to Justice Roberts.
So much changed this week when we saw the leaked portion of the manuscript of John Bolton's book, and now we know that the White House is trying to block the publishing of that due to what they see as classified information in that book. John Bolton's attorney has written a letter to the White House saying this: "We do not believe that any of the information could reasonably be considered classified, but given that Ambassador Bolton could be called to testify as early as next week, it is imperative that we have the results of your review of that chapter as soon as possible. Please do give me a call to let me know how we can work together toward that end." So who is in the right here, and does the White House have the right to stop this book from being published?
Well, they may not have the right to stop it from being published, but they certainly have a right to contest if there's classified information. I mean, that's a very typical process that it goes through a scrubbing to make sure there's not state secrets being divulged. But also, there's still executive privilege in play. So no matter what Bolton puts in this book, it doesn't directly say what's going to happen in terms of any live testimony that he would try to give in this proceeding. But it goes to a point that I think the White House team should really emphasize, which is at some point evidence has to stop flowing in. We're in a trajectory where we might have heard from Lev Bolton. I don't know if that means we're going to hear from Michael Avenatti next week. But we're getting to a point where it's not particularly fair to any defendant to keep having kind of mid-trial surprises about what you have to try to knock down.
But if there is relevant evidence or relevant witnesses, aren't Democrats to the end of the day going to make the case that we need to hear from them or see that evidence? Final thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. They're going to push hard, and they're going to scream like scalded cats if they don't get witnesses before this tribunal and before, obviously, the American public. But again, I think the Republicans just have to point back to what happened at the House. You had your chance. You didn't enforce subpoenas. You didn't even issue subpoenas in some cases. You built a record you have to live with.
Jim, you think they're going to bring these articles of impeachment up for a vote tomorrow?
I think we're going to have too much procedural chaos to get to that point, by tomorrow, but we'll see.
All right, Jim Trusty, appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Meanwhile, anything for a good parking space. How this SUV got pinned somehow between a building and a parking garage.
Oh.
Plus, counting down to the kickoff of Super Bowl 54. I heard it's in Miami. I heard Sandra's going.
My bags are packed, Ed.
Not that I'm bitter, but the game, anyways.